You're listening to Heritage Radio Network.
Welcome back to Business of Drinks. I'm Scott Rosenbaum.
And I'm Erica Ducey. Today, we're diving into one of the most fascinating growth stories in the global drinks industry, and it's one that's redefining what luxury means. So our guest today is Maggie Frerejean-Taittinger, co-founder of French Bloom, the alcohol-free sparkling wine brand that's become a case study in category creation.
In just over 4 years, French Bloom has expanded into more than 60 countries. In 2024, the brand produced over 500,000 bottles and now is on track to double that in 2025. It also made history as the first ever non-alcoholic brand to receive investment from LVMH. And this really marked a major vote of confidence in this kind of alcohol-free luxury category.
Yeah, and what's so remarkable about this story is that Maggie and her co-founders, they didn't just make a product, they created a new culture of celebration around non-alcoholic wine. French Bloom is now a fixture at events like Coachella, the James Beard Awards, the Roland Garros tennis tournament in France, Michelin-starred restaurants, and even in Formula One. So French Bloom is Formula One's official non-alcoholic sparkling partner now for the next decade.
Yeah, in our conversation, Maggie shares how French Bloom went from an idea that the industry kind of doubted to becoming the world's best-selling premium alcohol-free sparkling wine. And part of that journey was really kind of bridging this credibility gap, which the brand was able to do by winning multiple consumer-centric awards.
Yeah, and we get into the business playbook behind that growth, how French Bloom scaled fast while staying selective in its distribution path, how it built credibility with sommeliers and luxury partners, and how Maggie's background at the Michelin Guide and in fine wine shaped a product that sits comfortably beside a Grand Cru.
We also dig into the insights that really any founder can learn from building a brand around emotion and aspiration rather than just its function or characteristics, to better understanding today's modern consumer, often a flexi drinker. And this is really someone who is driving the next wave of moderation culture, whether they drink alcohol or not.
Yeah, and this conversation is a case study, I would say, in content creation and premiumization, in brand positioning, and in this new path of making moderation aspirational. So let's get into it, our conversation with Maggie Frerejean-Taittinger of French Bloom. And now, a word from our sponsor.
Listen, if you're launching or growing an alcohol brand, the first half of the year is when importers and distributors are making moves, which means right now is the time to get started in communicating with them.
Yeah, Swig Partners helps brands like yours grow faster and smarter and find the right distribution partners. The team has decades of relationships and is ready to help you succeed.
Right now, our listeners get an exclusive Q4 discount when you sign up before the end of 2025. Mention Business of Drinks and you'll get $300 off your service fee.
So start out the year strong by getting ahead of 2026 goals. Visit swigpartners.com/business of drinks. That's swigpartners.com/business of drinks. Maggie, welcome to Business of Drinks.
Thank you so much, Erica. I'm really pleased to be here.
Well, let's start out with your background. How did you go from the Michelin Guide and gastronomy into co-founding a non-alcoholic sparkling wine brand?
What a question. Let's start at the beginning. I'm an American who's been living in France for the last 10 years or so. I'm a foodie at heart. I love gastronomy. I love culinary adventures. And I had the pleasure, the privilege to work at the Michelin Guide for about 5 years, managing the international development of the guide. So it was a period where we were really focused on expanding the number of destinations for the famous culinary ratings. But it was also a period where there had been a recent acquisition of Robert Parker Wine Advocate. So as you can imagine, for me in particular, but also at that time at the Michelin Guide, food and beverage, or food and wine, really go hand in hand. There was so much attention to how can the pairing or the beverage offer bring out the beautiful flavors, the spectacular work of the chef on the plate. How can it really complement the meal? And I found myself in 2019 pregnant with my twins. As you can probably imagine where this story's gonna go, this is where it all started.
Yeah. And, tell me about the problem that you were trying to solve with French Bloom. How did the idea take shape with you and your co-founder?
Of course. So here I am, 2019, as I said, pregnant with my twins. And, for somebody who even today really appreciates and loves fine wine and champagne, I was really at loss and really surprised on how little the offer was, how disappointing the offer was. For me, there wasn't yet something that met my expectations when it comes to complexity, when it came to the kind of that three-dimensional nature of a wine. Of course, there's the nose, there's the palate, but there's also the length. And I found that, everything I tried just didn't, as I said, meet my expectations. So I knew there was something to be done. I shared that experience of feeling a little bit on the sidelines at the starred restaurants when I wasn't drinking alcohol. And I also, let's say, realized that I felt excluded from social events with friends. So this conversation began with my very good friend, Constance Jablonski. Constance and I go way back from my New York City days, 15 years ago. And, Constance wasn't pregnant or a mother at that time, but she was working in an industry, fashion, where networking is key. And networking, like a lot of other industries, is often in the late hours of the evening with something alcoholic in your hand, often a flute. And, she felt like with everything that was expected of her as a fashion model, with the business travel, with the early mornings, with the social events, the networking, as I said, she couldn't drink, didn't want to drink alcohol every time she was out and about, but she didn't necessarily feel comfortable with water in her hand. So we kind of started to lay out the blueprint of the project. For me, with my background, I was adamant that let's try and create something that resembles, that approaches that complexity of the fine wines that I, as I said, still love today. But at the same time, as I was pregnant, I thought, can we attempt to not compromise when it comes to naturality? So there's suddenly the moment when you're pregnant, you have this enormous responsibility of everything you're consuming, potentially affecting, of course, this growing baby inside of you. So I was really adamant that let's keep it organic. I don't want, any sulfites. It should be 0.0% alcohol, so it can be pregnancy friendly. And let's not add anything unnatural, no sugar, no preservatives. Let's try and keep it as clean as possible. So that was my kind of must list. And then Constance really brought to the project from the start, can we build a brand? If we look at the maisons in the traditional and premium sparkling wines, we can name many of them. What do they make us feel? What is the promise for the consumer? And can we attempt to build an aspirational brand that is aspirational when it comes to storytelling, that is intentional when it comes to packaging? Like, let's try and create something that you can feel proud to bring to a dinner party or has a place on your table. So you can imagine that was a lot to ask for. And then we realized, unfortunately, neither of us had the know-how yet in order to really build that wine. So that's, of course, where the third member of the story, and that's my husband, Rodolphe Frerejean-Taittinger, is a champagne maker. He has his own maison of Grand Cru and Premier Cru in Avis called Frerejean Frere. And he's also a cognac maker. So we approached Rodolphe and said, we have this idea. What do you think? And to our surprise and delight, he found this quest, this challenge to be very interesting, and he joined the project.
Yeah. I'm curious, founders of successful brands often have a superpower. or an unfair advantage that helps them really leap ahead of other brands? What would you say was your superpower in coming to this project?
So I think that for French Bloom, it's really a combination of the three of us. I think that that's our sort of shared collective superpower. For me, it's obviously gastronomy. It's really understanding its place from an on-trade perspective, as well as brand building. I think Constance is somebody who has a very digital first approach. She's been, very active on social medias for a very long time. And she also brought this credibility in lifestyle and fashion, which I must say was really the first market that embraced French Bloom. And then Rodolphe, of course, there's no question. His superpower was being a little bit of a rebel in Champagne. He was really kind of at the heart of the growers movement back to this artisanal craftsmanship, where it's about acquiring their hectares, growing their wine, and then bottling it. He was already used to looking at things a little bit differently and not being afraid of what people may say. So the three of us together, it's really this authentic superpower, and it gave us credibility.
Yeah. Tell me about how this product is actually made, because I think, it's really fascinating to me that a lot of the non-alc wines, they have just felt like so stripped down, but I think that Bloom took a interesting approach to rebalance the wine. So, can you talk us through what that looked like?
Sure. So we launched our R&D in 2019, and we started dealcoholizing wines from all throughout France. We dealcoholized wine from Burgundy, from Le Loire, from Champagne, dare you say. And we realized something really quickly. It was that you can have the most extraordinary wine, a fine wine, that was meant to be a wine with alcohol. If you de-alkalize it, you're going to have disappointing results. So I think that's the first mistake that a lot have made in the past or continue to. It's by simply thinking that we can make some wine with alcohol and some without, and then call it a day. No. So what do they do instead? You go and kind of cover up or make up those disappointing results by adding sugar, by adding, aromas, synthetic flavors in order to kind of build back the profile. So what we started to understand and what we really kind of sat around the table and began was, how can we completely rethink the winemaking process, always keeping in mind that we will eventually dealcoholize the wine. So it was actually funny enough to say, it was my husband's experience in cognac which influenced this approach even more than champagne, because as you know, in cognac, you start with a base wine. The base wine, Uni Blanc, is undrinkable. And it's, of course, a base wine that's meant to be distilled. And after you distill the Uni Blanc, you have cognac. So we thought, can all of the work be done before the dealcoholization? And another thing really important to note of kind of why this is the case is, when you dealcoholize wine, you lose up to about 60% of the aromas. So that's really why you have this disappointing result. So what we do, which is really different, is build these base wines that are very full character, which sometimes are aged, for example, in new oak Burgundy barrels, in order to build this exaggerated wine base that after our dealcoholization process, it's balanced and you have French Bloom. But I just want to add, if we kind of start at the beginning, obviously for us, wine is first and foremost, it's a terroir, it's provenance, it's a year. And so we searched for our terroir, and we very intentionally went south of France to the Limoux, in Languedoc, for a few reasons. The first is, I mentioned that you need to start, let's say, with a wine of great character. So if you dealcoholize wines like a Chardonnay from Burgundy, you're going to not have a lot left. So if you go south into a sunny region, you're already kind of setting yourself up for success. But there's no question that in Languedoc, you're really at the heart of the natural wine movement. You have these young growers, these pioneers in winemaking who, when you come, because at the beginning we didn't have our own maison, we were working with partners at the start, and you come and you say, we're going to make dealcoholized sparkling wines. They listen. If you say that same thing to a grower in Burgundy, a vineyard in Burgundy, and it happened, they're going to chase you out with a shotgun. So, having this openness and this not being overly dogmatic to follow our technical specifications, because something I want to be very clear on is that we're not part of the AOC of Languedoc or Limoux. We have our own technical specifications that originally our partners and now we ourselves are employing. So what it means is, for example, we have a harvest, which is about 3 weeks earlier than the traditional Limoux harvest. We found that by picking our grapes, and we work primarily with organic Chardonnay and a little bit with Pinot Noir, but if we pick at this optimal freshness, we're going to have that kind of heightened acidity that we need for our base wines. And we also have completely fallen in love with the terroir of Limoux because here you have the high hills of Languedoc. There's limestone and clay, and you have a Mediterranean climate. So it's actually a few degrees cooler than in just below in Languedoc. So it's also really kind of building this character that we need. After we pick the grapes, and this is one of the final steps, is we then age our wines, depending on the cuvee, upwards from 100% or to 30%. So we age our wines for about 8 months in new oak Burgundy barrels in order to give this three-dimensional nature, this texture. And then the final step, of course, is the dealcoholization at a cold temperature.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. I think that is like so many more steps than you would possibly imagine. Also, it really takes a different approach to a lot of the sparkling or still NA wines that I've seen. So it's pretty fascinating. Now, one other thing I wanted to touch on with rebalancing is that is there like a step that's like the organic lemon juice and grape must as well? And like, how does that play into it?
Sure. So we have two collections. So for our Prestige collection, which is our first vintage, La Cuvée, and our Extra Brut, there is not. For our Blanc, Le Blanc and Le Rosé, which were our first cuvées, we do go back and rebuild the profile slightly by adding, for example, as you perfectly mentioned, organic lemon and a little bit of grape must in order to kind of rebalance and give you this sort of fuller, a little bit more fruit forward profile, which tends to please a larger audience, if I say it that way. Where our Prestige collection, you're really on organic Blanc de Blancs, where you're going to find for a wine lover, you're going to find that structure, that body, that length, in a more singular nature. Those are really wines for gastronomy.
Nice. So, you briefly mentioned the different products that are available. Can you talk us through the line and kind of how you are positioning each of those and the price points that they hit in the marketplace?
Sure. So I think I'll begin with just sharing that we have a conviction, Rodolphe, Constance, and I, and now our teams, that when you drink a fine wine, it's first and foremost for the emotion, it's for the complexity, it's for the pleasure, and I think the alcohol can be secondary. So that's really kind of what's been driving us with regards to creating our wines and the R&D and now our collection. And you have champagnes, which can be wines of celebration, but then you also have sparkling wines or champagnes, which are wines, if you hear me. So we also have that within our collection. If we begin at the core collection, which are a little bit more of these festive sparkling wines, we have Le Blanc and Le Rosé. And there in the United States, for example, you're starting at a price point of $39 for Le Blanc and $44 for the Rosé. These are two wines that are extremely well balanced, which have this great attack, have this lovely acidity and minerality, but are a little bit more fruit forward, and definitely can fit in a celebratory moment, but also from a pairing. We do have, today French Bloom works with over 500 Michelin starred restaurants around the world, and we do see the Rosé and or Le Blanc being proposed for the aperitif in a champagne trolley alongside their, champagne by the glass. We also have Le Blanc, which works extremely well. The mouthfeel, it works extremely well for cocktails. So, these are our two icons. These are definitely our two best sellers. I think they make up about 80% of our sales to date. But what we've really been pushing, and we hope to integrate all those learnings on this next collection into the Blanc and Le Rosé, is our Prestige collection. Here we have our newest wine that we released a few months ago, which is our Extra Brut. The Extra Brut is a wine, it's a sparkling Blanc de Blanc organic. It has a great texture. It has a beautiful tension, and it really reflects our terroir of Limoux. It has this salinity, this slight salinity that you kind of go back for. And it's a real wine of gastronomy, and it's meant for pairing. So what's also extremely interesting and innovative on this extra brut is, for the first time, we have 0 sugar. So while we never add any sugar in any of our wines, there often is a slight residual sugar. Here we have 0 sugar, 0 alcohol, of course, but you also have 1 calorie per glass. And while that wasn't the intention by any means, you can imagine for a certain customer and consumer, it's an important part of that decision. Do I really want to replace a glass of wine with something that's worse for me, that's high calorie, or that has chemicals, or is high sugar? Not really. So again, making sure that that trade-off is considered. And then we have our wonderful work of art. I can call it our first La Cuvée Vintage 2022. The La Cuvée Vintage was a lot of fun to develop. It took about 4 years of constant R&D in about 200 iterations. My husband and I have a shared passion for old vintage French sparkling wines. We love 25, 30-year-old champagnes or French sparkling, and we wondered, can we create a wine that evokes a traditional sparkling wine at its peak maturity, but keeping in mind, in the non-alcoholic space, you don't have the possibility to overly age wines because we don't add sulfites, we've removed the alcohol, we don't have any preservatives, so you have a few years to enjoy your vintage. So it's really kind of shifting this whole perception of the older the wine, the better it is, or I need to buy this vintage and forget about it for 15 years in my cellar. It's actually, this is a wine that's been created at its peak maturity today to be enjoyed tomorrow. So here it's a organic Blanc de Blanc, also of course from Limoux, from the highest hills of Limoux. And we age 100% of the Chardonnay in new oak Burgundy barrels for about 8 months. And it gives this extremely complex nature, but we also play a little bit on the oxidation, because we don't add sulfites, it starts to oxidate a little bit. Like, I don't know if you like Jura, for example, but you start to get a little of these Jura notes. And if we talk about singularity, I mean, La Cuvée Vintage 2022, it's very singular. So it's definitely not for everybody, but there is a client for it. We only produced 17,000 bottles of this vintage, and we only have about 1,000 left. So we've confirmed that there is a customer base for it, but it's a customer who most likely often likes old vintage sparkling wines.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, the range of products, there's so many different ways into this brand, which I think is interesting. And I also wanted to hear more about the branding of this project. So French Bloom, from the name to the visual identity, really, what was the concept that you were looking to convey? And I wonder how it's changed over time as you scaled this brand globally.
Yeah, I think from the beginning, branding was more than just a name or a logo for us. At the founding story, we really discussed, can we build a brand that even transcends our own category? Our mission for French Bloom, our objective is to be a top 10 sparkling wine brand, period. And the fact that we're non-alcoholic is secondary. So with that, let's be extremely demanding on ourselves in terms of experience, in terms of brand building, in terms of storytelling, packaging. And we wanted French Bloom to feel intentional and elevated in every detail. So you could bring it to a dinner party as a gift, or you could have it on your table and be proud. Really, in the world of sparkling wine, we all say, tell me what champagne you drink, I'll tell you what club you're in, right? Or tell me what sparkling wine you drink, the brand, and I'll tell you what club you're a part of, because we all know, I don't want to name brands, but the person who drinks this one often gives off a bit of a different feeling than somebody else. So can we create a club? Can French Bloom be something that people actually want to be a part of? And if I'm very honest with you, the name French Bloom was chosen to be exported, because we never, even though we're a French product, our headquarters are in France, our wine is made here and bottled, we never thought that France would be a market for French Bloom. We knew it would be kind of a window into our brand, but we thought it would be a secondary market. And to our surprise, it's our second largest market after the United States. Who would have thought? But I think we'll get there later. So we chose, French Bloom because anybody can say it. So French, obviously, because it expresses, we're extremely proud, and it expresses our savoir-faire, our terroir, our heritage as well, but also kind of the French art of living. Myself as an American, being implanted in France these last 15 years, I realized that for French people, any opportunity to meet up is a good one. And like, it just still blows my mind how the cafes are overflowing after work. And there's just this feeling of conviviality and togetherness that I love. So we wanted to kind of take that element and feeling of France, the best reflection of what France is. But also one that's inviting, joyful, and innovative. And then Bloom, Bloom for us is really about opening up, being the best versions of ourselves. French Bloom really was developed during COVID, during a time when I think we all realized that without health, the world can literally stop, and health is the new wealth, but also how important those human connections are. So, we really, Constance and I share this belief that sometimes staying up a little bit too late, catching up with your girlfriends at night can do just as good, maybe even better than waking up that next day and getting to your yoga or Pilates class. So blooming, going back to what it means, is we believe we're the best versions of ourselves when we're together, when everybody's able to cheers, and when we're all around the same table. So that's Bloom. And then lastly, I'm sure the big question is, with the visual identity and packaging, we definitely leaned into the luxury cues, the elegance of traditional French sparkling wine, because we wanted it to sit comfortably next to, other premium maisons, but also signaling kind of a new era of French celebration, one that's inclusive and forward facing.
I mean, it's fascinating because I think that's a lot of what we're talking about in the American drink space right now, is just needing more of those opportunities to get together and have that convivial experience. And I think this is like, yeah, definitely, one of those products. It's like, hey, here we are. You don't need to have alcohol in order to have that experience.
Absolutely.
Well, I wanted to talk about the business side. So, you scaled this brand from 10,000 bottles to 500,000 in just 4 years. What were the most important growth unlocks that made that possible?
Absolutely. I think the first growth unlock was definitely arriving at the right product. I think continuing to push ourselves with iteration. It's constant improvement. What I mean is we're on the 10th version of our Blanc, for example. Every production, we're integrating new technical innovations. So once we were finally ready to launch French Bloom, it was the end of 2021. And we had an incredible success with our first partner. It was a luxury retailer in France. It was Le Grand Épicerie, which is part of the Bon Marché. And we launched in October 21, Le Blanc and Le Rosé, in a store with 2 outlets that is heavily shopped at by Parisian clients. And we sold something like 10,000 bottles in the first 3 months.
Wow.
We then went over to UK and we launched in January 22 at Selfridges. And it was the same thing, within 1 week, we were the number 1 selling product in the wine shop. Slowly but surely, we started to realize that we have a successful launch approach, which is a little bit, let's say, different than those who have come before. As I said, luxury department stores have been very important flagship partners for French Bloom. But we've started to realize that we actually can go beyond the traditional wine shop, the food hall. We sell better next to luxury accessories than we do necessarily, next to other non-alcoholic wines. And that was sort of one of the learnings and one of the big opportunities to scale. Secondly, and very importantly, we've been very fortunate to have key investors behind us almost since the beginning. One of our very first investors to join back in 21 was Jean Moetz of Petrus, of course, the MD of Petrus Wines. And, he has been so important to really believing in this conviction, like us, that we can create something, and let's push ourselves until we create something that is at that same level in terms of profile and complexity. And he's extremely innovative in the way that he sees wine and marketing of wine as well. And then, of course, the next step in terms of investment, it goes without saying, is Moet Hennessy. We were really happy to announce in October 2024 that we were the first non-alcoholic brand that the Moet Hennessy has invested in as a minority shareholder. And as you can only imagine, we've already unlocked a lot of synergies, and it's just the beginning.
Yeah, I imagine. I'm curious about the audience. So, were there some effective early tactics that you were able to use to build an audience and to build credibility for this brand? I mean, I know that, probably in the early days, and I think I've heard you say this in other interviews, like no one believed in the category. So, how was it that you were able to essentially quickly overcome that hurdle and grow the brand?
Sure. I mean, you could imagine launching French Bloom in France with my last name, in the country with this big culture in wine, and especially sparkling wine. It was a blasphemy. The things that we heard, you could only imagine, but we truly believed in this conviction, and, we would not stop at any challenge, any negative feedback. We just took it to motivate us further. But going back to your question of kind of what are those early tactics to build credibility in this new category, first was awards. I think like early credibility builders were this recognition that helped us sort of earn trust in this new brand category. That includes, firstly, French Bloom has been named the world's best non-alcoholic sparkling wine at the renowned World Sparkling Wine Awards for 3 years. And this is, of course, a blind tasting through experts in wine and spirits and distribution. And then for the last 2 years running, we're really happy from consumers that we've been voted the USA Today's best non-alcoholic wine in the US for the last 2 years. So this really shows us strong consumer resonance as well. And those awards, as you can imagine, really both talk to trade and consumers. And it also underlines the fact that this isn't just a trend, that, that French Bloom can be a benchmark for quality. The second growth kind of unlock in terms of building credibility was also selective distribution. As I mentioned, some of these luxury department stores, but we chose and we continue today to only be tier 1 channels only. So this is the department stores, but it's also, the hundreds of Michelin-starred restaurants you can find French Bloom. We're also in some of the most well-visited and luxury hotels around the world as well, 5-star and palace hotels. So I think being able to associate French Bloom with this luxury consumption moment has definitely helped in terms of credibility. And interestingly enough about that, we also learned quite quickly that placement on these menus, where we're placed and how, is also key to rotation and also key to ensuring that people see us. So what we found is that French Bloom, the closer we are to the sparkling wines, the better. Typically, they're creating a new category, of non-alcoholic sparkling wine, and there you can find French Bloom. The second best place is in the mocktail, the non-alcoholic cocktail menu. And then the very worst place is obviously sodas, coffee. You're not going to necessarily go there if you're looking for something like French Bloom. But also the price point. We find that French Bloom tends to really excel when we're at about 80% of the price of the house champagne, and that by the glass. So, if your restaurant has, $26 for the house champagne, perhaps French Bloom will be at about the $20 mark.
That's fascinating. And I'm curious also about the rollout in the US. So I know that that French Bloom is carried like in so many restaurants, and I'm interested in hearing like from the distribution perspective, like how did the product roll out in the US, and like what distribution channels and essentially like retail placements have been the most successful?
Of course. So there's no blueprint for distributing super premium non-alcoholic sparkling wine, especially in the United States. So most of my team, including my husband, come from the traditional wine and spirits industry. So, they're considering and dealing with a 3-tiered system. For the US, we understood quickly that we don't have to. So we have our own subsidiary. We actually import French Bloom into the United States. And then we've tested and learned with many different distribution possibilities and partners. Everything from going with the non-alcoholic distributors, the distributing ourselves, the more traditional premium wine and sparkling. And again, there's no right or wrong path, but for us, for French Bloom, what we've started to understand now after about 3 years of being in the United States is that we tend to do best with a kind of a champagne and a wine distributor, because those are the ones who, depending on the portfolio, if we're close to kind of that premium portfolio level, those are the ones that have experience doing tastings, who have those contacts with the sommeliers, that know how to talk about sparkling wine. And because our consumers are champagne and wine drinkers, our clients tend to also, be great champagne and wine accounts. So that's the answer there. But also, we've been really fortunate to have a really strong direct-to-consumer approach. Wine in certain parts of the world, including the United States, if you're doing, I don't know, you know better than me, Erica, but 5 or 7% direct-to-consumer, you're doing pretty well. Here we're at about 20 to 25% globally, including the United States. So we see that as a privilege. Like, we get to interact directly from our e-com with our consumers. So we're able to integrate their feedback, understand their behaviors in terms of repeat buys, be able to engage with them directly. And that's something that we don't take for granted, but something that we want to continue to develop.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's really so interesting to me because I think non-alcoholic wine used to be a category that really was considered compromise. And I think French Bloom is one of the few brands that has really been able to convince consumers that it's worth paying, even more than $100 for a bottle of non-alcoholic sparkling wine. So, like, what would you say have been the most effective ways of getting people to try the product? Like, is it the on-premise placements? Is it, activations at retail shops? Is it pop-ups at sporting events or what have you? Like, what's the secret sauce that is continuing to drive trial for French Bloom?
Yeah, it's true that one of the biggest obstacles for us was helping people understand just because it's without alcohol doesn't mean it's a less than, right? Like, if you can still have pleasure and complexity and that three-dimensional nature of the wine and terroir, but it just happens to not have alcohol, maybe that can even be a plus plus. And it's organic, and there's no sulfites, and there's no sugar in the extra brut, for example. So there's been a lot of education and awareness, which has been necessary both from the trade perspective and then the final consumer. But we're getting there. I think that in the first few years, we definitely invested heavily in liquid to lips for some of our flagship partners like the Erewhon stores in LA. And that really actually allowed us to not only become the number one selling wine at Erewhon, not just the non-alc, but the wine at Erewhon, but also to be able to engage with a customer who would potentially be interested in French Bloom. Secondly, it's really about finding those believers, those early adopters in the on-trade, side. Some of our first clients from a hotel were the Carlisle or the Beverly Hills Hotel or the Chateau Marmont. And there it's just a no-brainer, to all of those places where you would traditionally see a sparkling wine with alcohol, to have an offer at that same level for those who don't want to drink, of course. So here you're able to reach and tap into, 8 outlets or 10 outlets with a few believers has been important. And then on the restaurant side as well, we, some of our very first clients who now are bringing in all of our all of our collection are, the 3-star La Providence, for example, or Junsik in New York, or Aska in Brooklyn. You're starting to have more chefs and sommelier teams who also are waking up to this realization that alcohol-free shouldn't be an afterthought. It shouldn't be, you shouldn't feel like you're having something less than because you're not drinking for whatever reason, or you're drinking less during that meal. And so I think it's the human relationships, it's liquid to lips, it's education, and it's also encouraging customers to give non-alcoholic a second try. I admire so much those who have come before us in the space, and I can name, all of these incredible founders and winemakers who collectively were paving the way. But there are some who are really like entered at the budget level, who you can find it at the supermarkets for a very cheap price, that didn't necessarily have the quality to stand up. And for those consumers who maybe had a negative experience, we need to kind of get them to try it again.
Yeah, yeah. Well, what's working right now on the marketing front, on social platforms, kind of activations that you're doing? And how is it that you decide with your team, like where to put the money and the energy? Is it more like brand awareness? Is it more like direct return on investment? Like, how do you conceptualize that?
Well, it's an interesting question because we've just come off with our 2026 pre-budget planning for next year. So we had all of our executive team from around the world come into Paris, and we were asking those questions. To answer firstly of like, where do we put the dollar? We're still startup mode. Yes, we've produced last year 500,000 bottles, and we're typically doing 3 or 4 times growth every year. But we need to ensure that every dollar there's an ROI, and it's helping to support our trade and our partners. So that's very much kind of where we are. That being said, we also want to ensure that French Bloom is present where culture is shaped. What I mean is, partnerships, or having French Bloom, for example, be present at the Coachella Arts and Music Festival these last 3 years, having French Bloom, be the partner of the James Beard Awards or the Michelin Guide, and now actually Formula One. We're really happy to announce that French Bloom's been selected as the first ever non-alcoholic sparkling wine for the next 10 years for the F1. So for that, of course, let's take F1 there. The immediate value is awareness. It's not just getting, the product to the thousands of consumers who can discover French Bloom at the Grand Prix themselves, but it's about leveraging the brand equity of the Formula One, which in my mind aligns perfectly with French Bloom. We have so many shared values, such as innovation, such as craftsmanship, but also such as performance. And, French Bloom is really starting to go more into the performance space, the performance territory, because it began, we were present at the Roland Garros, for example, the French Open this year, and now with the Formula One. But here, it's not only, as I said, the opportunity to have the awareness, but performance fits in well with French Bloom. Many of our customers are actually choosing to drink less because they want to perform at their best. And so you can expect to see us a little bit more in that space. And I'd say lastly, these type of partnerships are also great kind of evergreen content generation, in the sense that, we can, Formula One, you have 26 Grand Prix, and you should have a couple more next year. So it's an opportunity to kind of keep French Bloom anchored in cultural credibility throughout the year.
Yeah. And is there one brand collaboration or activation or placement so far that has stood above the rest? And if so, why did it work?
I think I'm going to put a bet on the Formula One. I know it's a little bit too early to tell, but I think in terms of recruiting a new audience, it will be a success for us. What I mean is, who would have ever thought 5 years ago or 10 years ago that the fastest growing fan base of F1 are Gen Z and women? And, French Bloom customer base, it's also a bit more feminine. It's about 70% women, ages between 25 and 45. But here we're going to recruit a little bit of continue to engage with that customer, but also skew a little bit younger. And we're really excited because it's giving us incredible opportunities and different kind of activations to play around in. So I would say, we can check back in a few years, but we have really high hopes for the Formula One.
It's incredible that it's a 10-year partnership as well. So there's a lot of time for that to evolve. You mentioned just now that kind of core consumer. How do you think about the consumer universe for this product?
It's so funny because when we started building French Bloom, we were wrong about a lot of things. Like, we thought that France wouldn't be a market. We thought that, this is a product that's being created for pregnant women like myself at that time, or the sober community, or the religious market. Everyone loves to say, oh my gosh, French Bloom, you must be killing it in Saudi Arabia. And while those 3 segments of customers are extremely important for French Bloom, there's often a first discovery, perhaps, when a woman's going through that stage in her life, for example. And they're also, they communicate a lot around the brand, and we love them, we appreciate them. But we estimate about 80% of our customers do drink wine and champagne. They're what we like to use the word flexi drinking. You can call it zebra striping, you can call it moderators, but we see customers who are drinking a higher quality of wine. I think for example, my husband and I, we represent where the space is going in terms of the wine industry is like we're drinking a higher quality, more premium wines, but we're just drinking a little bit less, right? It's quality over quantity. So here for French Bloom, it can stand on its own next to a beautiful glass of wine that maybe you started with and then you switch to French Bloom. Or perhaps people aren't drinking during the week and they still want to maintain that quality, that premiumness, that complexity, but without the alcohol. So who are our consumers? We attract all walks of life, but what I want to share, at least for French Bloom, is that the most powerful trend we see today, it isn't sobriety, it's flexibility. So consumers aren't saying no to alcohol. They're just saying not always, not every time. And again, when they're looking to drink a little bit less at an evening out, they very much are asking for French Bloom.
Yeah, yeah. And let's go back a little bit to you had mentioned with Moet Hennessy that they took a minority stake in French Bloom. And I believe that was their first ever alcohol-free investment. So congratulations.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and how did that deal come together? And can you talk a little bit about what that means for the business?
Sure. I think it's an incredible achievement for us. I think when we look at some of the most successful maisons that I've always looked up to, they're often within the Moet Hennessy portfolio. And, right at the beginning of our exchanges, I think we realized with their teams that we share the same vision for non-alcoholic celebration. We can enjoy, and come together while still being responsible when it comes to consuming alcohol. As you said, it's the first ever investment by LVMH in the alcohol-free space. So I think that it really underlines the fact that it's not a trend, right? It's a consumption shift and it's not going anywhere and it can live together. Whether it's a glass of sparkling wine with alcohol and a glass of sparkling wine without, it's about the occasion. It's about how somebody's feeling that day. And why not still be able to have something that elevates the experience at that same level? So you can imagine there's a lot of synergies that we've already identified with our new partners. Of course, first and foremost, there's the credibility. I think being positioned alongside some of the world's greatest wines and a group that stands for luxury has definitely helped French Bloom, and for that we're so grateful. There's also mutual R&D that you can imagine. We're really trying to together push the boundaries of what's possible and innovation in the space. And it's continuous, as I say, it's been 6 years, almost 7 now, that we're going further and further and further. And we're excited to keep trying to break through and have a little bit of an advantage there when it comes to R&D, but it's continuous. It's the striving for perfection. On the distribution side as well, we have opened some markets together, accessing their distribution network. But for the most part, we still have the majority and we remain in our kind of fast moving startup mode, which has gotten us to where we are today. And lastly, I would also mention that the corporate client is one that definitely should not be forgotten for those who are in our space. What I mean is, even before LVMH and even now more so, but we've had a lot of luxury brands come to us in the last couple of years because their CSR platform of there's environmental, but there's also diversity and inclusion. And I think when you go to a luxury boutique that you're maybe going to spend $15,000 to be offered champagne and water or Coke, you just don't necessarily feel like if you're opting at 11 a.m. for the non-alcoholic, like you're having that same experience. So we're working now with more and more, luxury brands, both in terms of in boutique, but also in their VIC events, their influencer and press events, because people are really waking up to this realization that I need an offer that's at that same level for every guest or every client, not just the majority, not just those who feel like drinking at that moment. And I don't know if Erica, I imagine that you're also out and about. There's still a couple nights a week where I go to an event and I didn't necessarily want to drink that night. I'm going for work and then I'm going to go home and put my kids to bed, or I have a really important meeting the next day. And it still kind of shocks me when you arrive and again, you have that tray of champagne and wine and water. So what do? I still sometimes take that champagne I didn't, again, want to drink, or I take that glass of wine. So I think in the events industry and the luxury kind of maison and brands, people are kind of waking up to expanding the offer.
Yeah, and I think it's just becoming more and more common. I mean, certainly we see in New York that venues and even party planners are getting better about providing that option, but in so many other parts of the country and the world, that's just not yet the case. So, yeah, definitely. And, I wanted to just ask as we start to wrap up, what would you say is the biggest bet that you've made on this whole journey that has paid off? And what's one that you're making right now?
So I think for us, our biggest bet, there's two. The first is going fully on the R&D, always reinvesting in the pushing it forward with regards to the quality of the product. I mean, if we look at the, non-alcoholic beer space, 15 years ago, many of those beers were undrinkable. Today, you're really approaching a level at, quite close to its alcoholic counterpart. So I think we're at the beginning of that trajectory when it comes to wine, but really believing that this, the quality of the product is the most important. That's the first and foremost. That was a bet, and it was a very expensive bet, but I think it's paying off because at the end of the day, that's more important than anything. And then secondly, I'd say with the positioning, ensuring that the branding that we had this non-alcoholic sparkling position not as a lesser than, and really believing that customers would appreciate if the complexity is there, if the wine profile is there, that they'd be willing to pay for quality. And then for what bet are we currently making now? I don't think you're going to be surprised, but I'm going to go back to the Formula One. I mean, this 10-year global partnership with Formula One and starting to go into the territory of performance, that's where some of our attention will be.
Yeah, definitely. And it makes sense. That performance angle, while you may not think of it at the beginning, once you do put some thought to it, you're like, wow, that actually, that's a huge part of, importance for any athlete, whether you're driving a car at over 100 miles an hour or hitting that tennis ball across the net or whatever it is.
But also C-suite. I mean, I think like a professional. I think, where you're based or where I am today in New York City, like, executives are training like professional athletes. They're waking up at 5 a.m., maybe even earlier. You're doing your sports, you're having your ice bath, you're going, I don't need to mention all the meetings, going straight till midnight and client entertaining. Many of us are realizing that we just can't perform and consume alcohol every time. But again, it's about balance. It's about still being able to offer a client or maybe be able to participate in that celebratory moment without necessarily drinking alcohol.
Yeah, yeah.
And still being your best and clear the next day.
Absolutely. So let's talk about French Bloom 5 years from now. Where do you see the brand in terms of the products that it has, the markets that it's in, maybe the partnerships that it's doing? We know that the Formula One will still be going.
So we're pure players. We don't want to be a maison that's making some wine with alcohol, some that's without. We don't want to be making tranquille wine. Like we don't want to be making flat wine. So, we want to be pure players in non-alcoholic sparkling wine. So in terms of collection, of course, when the year permits, you can expect to see us with a vintage, for example, that really reflects the season that passed. So we're about to release our 2023 La Cuvée vintage, which I actually tasted last week, which is extraordinary, but very different than the 2022. A little bit less a little bit less exaggerated, a little bit more back into this whole sort of vintage expectation of what was the 2023 year in Limoux. But what I hope that you can see in the next 5 years is that we will become a top 10 premium sparkling wine brand, not just in the 0% space, but across the entire category, because being without alcohol doesn't define us. It's what we stand for. And I hope that this next wave of innovation in the non-alcoholic space will kind of support that.
Yeah. And what do you see as the next wave of innovation in both NA and luxury drinks?
Yeah. So we're seeing going back to provenance, kind of authentic terroir driven products. So having that authenticity, that origin for luxury drinkers who are seeking products with compelling backstories, but also with heritage and craft. I also see, and this of course goes back to my old hat at the Michelin Guide, but I'm really excited by what I see, which is the art of moderate pairings. What I mean is, of course, there's the wine pairing, which we all love. There's the non-alcoholic pairing now, more and more, as you rightfully said, in the United States, but also in other markets. Of course, they're going to have an offer to follow the meal in the non-alcoholic. But what we see in these last few years is the moderate pairing. So perhaps it's lunch on a Wednesday and I'm having 5 courses, but I'd like 2 glasses of wine. So what is the sommelier proposing in those other courses in the non-alcoholic, but that can still stand against those other beautiful wines that it's proposing? So I love that because for me, it's more about it's just the pairing, right? The fact that you can mix alcoholic and non-alcoholic wines is sort of secondary, but it's more about like how can we offer wines that complement the meal. So I think my bet is there, and it also very much just represents the industry, which is wine will exist for the next 7 centuries. There's no question, but you can't also deny that people are drinking a little bit less. So, let's follow that consumption shift and still offer wines. We want to keep wines on the table. In France, 20 years ago, I'd look around and everybody at business lunches had wine. Today, there's very few. So let's keep wine on the table and still part of the pairing and just have it be non-alcoholic from time to time.
I love that. All right. And to wrap up, our final question that we always ask people is, is there a book or a person or a class or someone or something that you think other drinks entrepreneurs should follow or would take insight or inspiration from that informed your own journey?
I think I would actually recommend a book on empathy because for me, empathy is the single most important skill in brand building, in scaling a team, in leading a company. So I would recommend The Empathy Edge by Maria Ross. It shows that empathy isn't a soft skill, it's a business advantage. But also, I think a lot of us think that it's something that's inherent in us, but actually, studies show that it's a skill that can be learned, that can be improved. So for drink entrepreneurs, I think when you're building new categories, when you're thinking about your customer, I'm also thinking about my clients, it's really kind of putting yourself in their shoes and stepping out of your own bubble and, trying to see the world through your consumer's eyes. And that's what we try to do. We're super customer-centric, consumer-centric at French Bloom. And yeah, I know that while this project started with my own needs, I'm one very specific customer persona today, and we're always trying to go out and understand what is the problem, what are they looking for, and how can we put ourselves in the shoes of our customers. So empathy.
I love that. You need to move fast and break things, but not too many things, because it's people who are both your customers, your teams, all of that. Well,
Absolutely.
Maggie, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on Business of Drinks.
Thank you so much, Erica. I really enjoyed this conversation. Have a wonderful day.
Thanks for joining us on Business of Drinks. Subscribe on YouTube at Business of Drinks Podcast. Follow us on Spotify or listen in on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Please tap the notification button so you'll be the first to know when a new episode drops.
And help us spread the word. Click those star ratings, give us a review, and share episodes or clips on your socials. It really helps us reach new listeners.
Finally, if there's something that you'd like us to cover on the podcast, tell us. We're at podcast@businessofdrinks.com or reach out via Instagram or LinkedIn.
We love hearing from you, and we respond to each and every message. Thanks, and see you next time.